Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Who was he really? Was he just a historical figure meeting Abraham, or was there something far greater at play? A hidden knowledge, a cosmic mission, a divine purpose we are only beginning to grasp? These are questions that have puzzled minds for millennia, yet they feel urgent even today. Imagine standing on the battlefield with Abraham, fresh from victory, when a mysterious king approaches, offering blessings that will echo through eternity. This is not a casual encounter. This is a moment where heaven and earth intersect, where destiny and faith collide. Melchizedek steps into the narrative almost silently, yet the ripples of his presence continue to shape how we understand priesthood, divine order, and the unfolding of God's plan. His story is brief, yet it lingers, demanding that we look closer, think deeper, and question what we think we know about spiritual authority. In a world where people search for meaning and purpose, the mystery of Melchizedek resonates like a whisper from the past. It challenges us to ask, what if the Bible holds layers of wisdom we have yet to uncover? What if figures like Melchizedek were placed in history not just to act, but to teach, guide, and inspire those who seek the truth? The curiosity he sparks is not just intellectual, it is spiritual. It urges us to look beyond the surface, to see patterns, messages, and purposes that are not immediately visible, yet have profound implications for faith and understanding. The King James Bible introduces him as the King of Salem, a priest of God Most High, who meets Abraham after a victorious battle. He blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a tithe. From this brief encounter, Hebrews 7 draws a powerful connection, presenting Melchizedek as a type of Christ, an eternal priest whose authority surpasses the lineage of Levi and the laws of Moses. The KJV gives us a glimpse, a shadow of the depth this figure holds. We see his priesthood, yet we do not fully understand his origins, his cosmic role, or the full magnitude of his mission. But the Ethiopian Bible takes us further, revealing hidden layers that most of the world has never seen. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserves a vast canon of 81 to 88 books, including texts like 1 Enoch and Jubilees, which expand on Melchizedek's story in extraordinary ways. Here, he is not just a king or priest, he is a pre-existent, eternal figure whose mission spans the heavens and the earth. He interacts with angels, guides spiritual order, and carries knowledge that has been largely lost to the Western canon. He is depicted as a guardian of divine mysteries, a figure whose role extends far beyond Abraham, whose presence in history was no accident but part of a grander design. The contrast between these two portrayals is striking. The King James Bible offers the tip of the iceberg, a symbolic and theological lens through which to view Melchizedek. The Ethiopian Bible plunges into the depths, uncovering details that challenge our understanding of divine authority, cosmic order, and the spiritual hierarchy that governs creation. Exploring this hidden knowledge can reshape how we see biblical history and spiritual leadership. It asks us to consider questions that stretch our imagination and faith alike. And this is where you, the viewer, become an essential part of the journey. You are very special to us as a viewer. We want you to stay with us for a long time. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends. Your engagement is not just a number, it is a part of this mission to explore the depths of hidden biblical wisdom and bring it to light. Help us to reach 10,000 subscribers. Your click, your share, your support helps us dig deeper and bring more revelations to you. Please support us financially by giving us a SuperThink certificate so that we can reach you with as much deep knowledge as possible. Every contribution strengthens this journey, helping us uncover truths that have been hidden for centuries. And which city and country you watching this video with, and at what time? Write your name and city in the comments. It's not just about engagement. It's about building a community of seekers, people who are curious, passionate, and committed to discovering the deeper layers of spiritual truth. If you would like to get the complete Bible 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English, the link is given in the description. This gives you direct access to the texts where Melchizedek's story and wisdom are preserved, allowing you to explore and connect with these mysteries firsthand. It's an invitation to see what has long been hidden, to understand the depth of his mission, and to follow a path that stretches across time and history. As we step into this journey, remember that the story of Melchizedek is more than ancient history. It is a call to curiosity, a test of faith, and an opportunity to explore the intersections of destiny, divine plan, and human experience. From his first appearance, he challenges us to question, reflect, and seek understanding beyond what is obvious. He is a guide, a mystery, and a key to insights that have been preserved through centuries. In the chapters ahead, we will travel from the familiar accounts in Genesis to the hidden wisdom preserved in Ethiopia. We will witness encounters, blessings, and spiritual missions that have shaped history in ways most people have never imagined. And through it all, you are not just a viewer, you are a participant in this journey. Your curiosity, engagement, and support are part of the unfolding story, connecting past and present, faith and discovery, mystery and understanding. When Abraham came back from the battle against the kings who had taken Lot, he was tired but victorious. A person appeared who would change the course of biblical history forever. The king of Salem, whose name means peace, was this man. He was also called the Priest of God Most High, a title that had both spiritual and cosmic meaning. When Abraham got close, Melchizedek brought him bread and wine. This act has been seen as a sign of God's blessing and friendship for hundreds of years. Melchizedek blessed Abraham right away, without any introduction or explanation of where he came from or who he was. In return, Abraham gave him a tenth of everything he had gained from the battle. The scene looks simple, but it is very deep. This man appears out of nowhere, with no introduction or explanation, but people respect, awe, and obey him. In Genesis 14, there isn't much information, but what there is suggests deep truths. Melchizedek is not just a king giving a normal blessing. He is a priest who acts as a bridge between God and people. He sees Abraham's victory as coming from God, but his role doesn't seem to fit in with the history of people around him. He is not part of normal family trees or earthly politics, which gives him an aura of eternity. Scholars and theologians have long been amazed by the fact that he seems to have no father, mother, beginning of days, or end of life. This lack of an origin makes his figure timeless and mysterious. Even Abraham, who had been walking with God for decades, bows down to him in humility. This shows that he recognizes a spiritual authority that is much higher than any human rank or achievement. Genesis 14 tells a short story, but it gives us a glimpse into something much bigger. The King James Bible gives us a base, but it doesn't answer all of our questions. Who was Melchizedek really? Why did he meet Abraham right then? And why does the text stress his priesthood in a way that makes it seem like it will last beyond this life? These are mysteries that the King James translation keeps but doesn't explain. The story is mostly about action, the blessing and the tithe, but the figure's origins, cosmic role, and ultimate purpose are still unclear, which leaves room for thought and speculation. Melchizedek shows up again in the Psalms, specifically Psalm 110, where David talks about a priest who will always be like Melchizedek. This is amazing because the psalm connects a historical king to an eternal priesthood, making a typology that connects time and strengthens spiritual authority. Many Christians see the psalm as a prophecy, but its short description keeps an air of mystery. It doesn't say who Melchizedek was or why his order is better than the Levitical priests. Instead, it shows him as a model for an eternal priesthood that goes beyond family ties. The link between Abraham's meeting and the eternal priesthood in the Psalms makes readers think of Melchizedek as both a real person and a symbol, both a person who lived in the past and a person who will live forever. The New Testament's Hebrews 7 builds on this idea by showing Melchizedek as a type of Christ, a priest whose order can't be measured by family ties. The author stresses that Levi, the priestly line in Israel, had not yet existed when Melchizedek met Abraham. This means that Melchizedek's priesthood was better in principle. It is characterized as eternal, a priesthood independent of mortality or succession, and it presents the concept of a spiritual hierarchy unbound by human conventions. But even Hebrews doesn't cover everything. We hear about how great, superior, and eternal he is, but we don't know where this power comes from, how big his role in the universe is, or the deeper mysteries of his purpose. The picture of Melchizedek in the King James Bible is both simple and deep. He is a symbol of peace, the king of Salem, which means city of peace. He brings bread and wine, gives blessings, and takes tithes. Every gesture has a meaning. In Christian theology, bread and wine are later seen as symbols of communion, but in this case, they are just a normal gesture of hospitality that is made more special by the spiritual status of the person giving it. His blessing of Abraham is short but powerful because it acknowledges Abraham's journey, his victories, and his relationship with God. Melchizedek's actions show authority, insight, and spiritual perception that go beyond what most people can understand, even without more story. Even though his actions are clear, the KJV doesn't answer important questions. There is no mention of Melchizedek's family, his role in the larger cosmic order, or why his priesthood is not part of the Levitical system. These gaps make it hard to figure out what they mean. The King James Bible is a reliable text that has guided many believers over the years. However, it also leaves room for speculation, allowing seekers to wonder about the hidden layers behind this brief but powerful appearance. It makes readers think about what it means for someone to live outside of the normal limits of time and family, to have power that doesn't come from birthright but is still acknowledged by even the most powerful patriarch. The lack of information about Melchizedek has also kept people interested in him. Scholars, theologians, and adherents are attracted to the figure precisely because he embodies both presence and absence, familiarity and obscurity. In a way, Melchizedek is a door that connects earthly victories with divine authority, temporal history with eternal priesthood. The King James Bible shows him with respect and in a short way, which makes you think about him while keeping the mystery. He is the king who blesses and the priest who mediates, but no one knows where he came from or what he really wants, so his story is stuck between what we can see and what we can't. His role still has an effect today, even with the KJV's limitations. The meeting with Abraham, the connection in Psalm 110, and the explanation in Hebrews 7 all show that there is a connection between human history and God's plan. Melchizedek serves as a benchmark for evaluating eternal priesthood, a reference point for comprehending spiritual authority, and a figure whose fleeting presence resonates throughout history. He is a good example of how divine purposes can intersect with human history in ways that are both subtle and deep, immediate and eternal, historical and timeless. This depiction leaves readers with a strong sense of tension. Melchizedek acts with authority, gives blessings, and mediates divine favor, but his origins and cosmic significance are purposefully left out. The King James Bible gives us enough information to know how important he is, but it also keeps the mystery alive, making us think, ask questions, and be amazed. He is a man who is not part of the usual story. His presence demands recognition without explanation, and his story, though short, makes anyone who reads it think about the unseen parts of faith and divine order. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has a canon that is much bigger than those of most other Christian groups. It has between 81 and 88 books, each with layers of history, prophecy, and spiritual insight that are often missing from Western Bibles. In these texts, Melchizedek is not just a passing character. He is a central and lasting figure whose role is much bigger than what is found in Genesis or Psalms. The Ethiopian texts, especially Jubilees and 1 Enoch, give us a better picture of who he was before he was born, who he is as an eternal priest, and how important he is to the universe. They show us a person whose influence reaches both the heavenly and earthly realms. These texts depict Melchizedek as a pre-existent entity whose existence precedes that of Abraham and the formation of specific terrestrial lineages. The Ethiopian texts place him in a larger spiritual context and show him as a deliberate tool of divine order. This is different from the King James Bible, which suddenly brings him into Abraham's story. He is more than just a king or priest from the past. He is a priesthood that goes beyond time and connects the human and the divine. The Ethiopian canon stresses the idea that some people in biblical history were part of a bigger, ongoing plan, beings whose purpose can't be fully understood just by looking at events in the past. Jubilees, sometimes called the Lesser Genesis, adds to the story of Genesis by giving more information and context that is not found in the standard Western canon. In this case, Melchizedek is not only blessing Abraham, but he is also carrying out a divine mission that has been given to him from the start. His actions are planned and purposeful, meant to guide and teach people in line with God's plan for the universe. People see him as a very spiritually powerful person, and even the patriarchs respect his wisdom and insight. In these texts, he is not limited by earthly constraints. His authority is derived directly from God, establishing a priesthood that transcends human hierarchies and temporal succession. The Book of 1 Enoch sheds more light on Melchizedek's cosmic side. 1 Enoch is mostly known for its stories about angels, watchers, and history before the flood. It also shows Melchizedek as a mediator in heavenly councils, where he interacts with celestial beings and takes part in divine decrees that shape the course of human events. This picture shows that he is an eternal priest, which is not a title he got from birth or limited to one earthly domain. Instead, he is a permanent channel of divine will that connects heaven and earth, guides spiritual authority, and protects sacred knowledge. The Ethiopian canon paints him as a priest whose role is essential to keeping cosmic balance. He is eternal, has absolute authority, and cannot be limited to just one historical event. The Ethiopian texts are more clear about Melchizedek's important role than the KJV, which only gives a brief description of him and leaves many questions unanswered. People say that he knows everything about God's plans, that he is a part of heavenly councils, and that he has a big impact on important events in human history. His blessing of Abraham is no longer just one event. It is now part of a long line of spiritual guidance and a visible sign of an eternal office. This point of view shows how deep and far-reaching his mission is. It shows that his influence goes beyond what people can see and even affects the course of God's purpose. One of the most interesting things about these texts is how much they focus on his pre-existence. Melchizedek is not born into the priesthood. He exists in a state of eternal readiness, a being whose existence has always been in line with God's plan. His role is not based on chance. It is needed. The Ethiopian canon sees him as a spiritual foundation, someone whose presence makes sure that God's order is kept up over time. He is a priest before the Levitical line, before the idea of inheritance, and even before the idea of nations. This pre-existence adds an air of mystery and respect, making him seem both temporal and eternal, human and beyond. The Ethiopian texts also stress how important Melchizedek's priesthood is to the universe. He is not just a go-between for Abraham or the people of Israel. He is also a channel for divine energy and authority throughout all of creation. His presence is connected to keeping spiritual harmony and doing God's will, which shows that his role goes beyond what regular priests do. This picture shows that the priesthood is not just a ceremonial or symbolic role. It is a cosmic function, a living office that interacts with angels, divine decrees, and the spiritual structure of the world itself. This viewpoint greatly broadens the comprehension of his importance, demonstrating that Melchizedek is much more than a mere historical reference. He is a pivotal figure of everlasting spiritual authority. The Ethiopian canon gives readers a view of Melchizedek that is both awe-inspiring and very helpful. His story connects the earthly and the divine, giving us a glimpse into how God's plan unfolds over time and space. The Ethiopian texts celebrate his eternal nature, his pre-existing wisdom, and his role as a spiritual guide whose actions affect both heavenly and earthly realms. The KJV, on the other hand, portrays him as a historical figure whose origins are unknown. He becomes not just a priest and king, but also a symbol of continuity, authority, and divine will, a figure who shows how deep God's plan for creation is. The depth of these texts pushes readers to learn more about the history of the Bible. Melchizedek is no longer just a minor character in the story of Abraham. He is now a major character whose power and influence can be felt throughout the spiritual and cosmic worlds. The Ethiopian texts make it clear that some biblical characters should be understood not only in terms of historical events, but also in terms of divine purpose, eternal priesthood, and cosmic significance. His presence underscores that spiritual authority frequently functions in manners beyond human comprehension, and that concealed knowledge may coexist with the historical narrative, awaiting those prepared to pursue profound understanding. This picture changes Melchizedek from a mysterious king-priest into a central figure whose role connects the present and the future. His pre-existence, eternal priesthood, and cosmic responsibilities exemplify the profundity of the Ethiopian biblical tradition, demonstrating that it retains insights not found in other versions. The Ethiopian canon provides a more comprehensive and complex comprehension of his importance, urging readers to transcend superficial interpretations and acknowledge the extensive spiritual networks influencing historical occurrences. Melchizedek is not just a person to study, he is also a living proof of God's plan. He is a priest whose influence lasts forever and whose mission goes beyond time. Anyone who reads these texts is invited to look into the deep mysteries he stands for. Long before Abraham set foot in Canaan and long before Salem became a city of peace, Ethiopian texts said that Melchizedek was already there, fully formed, and given authority by God himself. He did not come into being at a specific time like humans do. Instead, he existed in a state that is beyond human comprehension, as a being whose presence existed before creation itself. This existence before creation puts him outside of human history and genealogy, but it is completely in line with the unfolding of God's plan. The texts make it clear that he was not just a priest or a king by chance or for a short time. They were meant to keep the universe in order, to connect the spiritual world with the physical world, and to make sure that God's will flowed freely throughout all of creation. In these texts, Melchizedek is not just a human priest who talks to people. He is an important angelic figure. He interacts with beings that exist outside of time and space, like watchers and archangels, who carry out God's orders and keep creation stable. These heavenly beings know that he is in charge, and he often acts as a go-between for the divine and earthly worlds. Human priests are connected to family, rituals, and earthly institutions, but Melchizedek's priesthood is eternal, cosmic, and free from time limits. The texts show that his choices and actions have an effect on more than just what happens on earth. They also affect the larger spiritual balance, changing things in ways that people can hardly notice. The Ethiopian stories say that he was in heavenly councils, saw God's plans unfold, and even changed important events to keep things in order. The King James Bible only hints at this cosmic role's weight and responsibility through symbols. In Genesis 14, he blesses Abraham. This event seems unique and separate, but the Ethiopian texts turn it into a link in a chain of cosmic purpose. His blessing is not just a way of saying that Abraham won. It is also a way of saying that he has a duty to make sure that spiritual principles are followed throughout the universe. Every action and every word is part of a bigger plan that is carefully aligned with the divine plan that comes before human understanding. These texts stress his wisdom before the world was made, making him seem like someone who already knows what will happen in the future. He knows what will happen to nations, the paths of prophets, and the duties of kings, all while staying neutral and giving advice. This ability to see the future and have power made him different from regular priests and kings. It showed a spiritual order that people can only see a little bit of. The Ethiopian Bible places him firmly in a celestial framework, making him a living symbol of divine order. In contrast, the KJV only briefly presents him as a priest and king without any background or context. His existence serves as a reminder to readers that certain elements of biblical narrative transcend human understanding, functioning in realms where time, genealogy, and terrestrial authority hold no significance. Melchizedek's job of keeping divine order includes the angels as well. He makes sure that God's orders are carried out exactly as they should be and that spiritual disturbances don't upset the balance between heaven and earth. The Ethiopian texts say that he has power over all realms, which shows that he is a priest forever. He is a stabilizing force and a mediator of not only blessings but also cosmic alignment. This is very different from the King James Version, which doesn't give much information about his appearance. The KJV depicts a man who blesses Abraham and receives a tithe, a king-priest of mysterious presence. However, it fails to disclose the magnitude of his eternal influence, his comprehension of celestial hierarchies, or the rationale for his mission. In this broader view, Melchizedek's life and actions have many meanings and purposes. He is historical, interacting with humans like Abraham. He is symbolic, representing the eternal priesthood that transcends lineage. And he is cosmic, participating in the maintenance of divine order across creation. The Ethiopian texts combine these layers to show him as a being whose mission can't be fully understood by short human observation. Every meeting, blessing, or lesson he gives is part of a duty that has been going on since before creation and will continue forever. It shows that he is in line with God's will. The focus on his existence before creation also supports the idea that some biblical figures are not limited by time or human limitations. Melchizedek represents an everlasting archetype of priesthood and authority, predating laws, lineage, and human institutions. This makes readers think again about what it means to serve, lead, and act in line with God's will. It shows that some roles in the Bible are not just temporary titles, but permanent positions with duties and importance that affect the whole universe. The difference with the King James Bible is very clear. In the KJV, Melchizedek shows up out of nowhere, and there is no explanation of where he came from or what his purpose was other than to bless Abraham and collect tithes. Later in Hebrews, his priesthood is called eternal, but the larger context is mostly symbolic and theological, not narrative or cosmic. The Ethiopian texts fill in these gaps by giving a detailed account of his life before creation, his interactions with angels, and his role in keeping the universe's spiritual framework in place. This more detailed picture shows that Melchizedek was not just an incidental figure, but a key player in the divine order. His presence is just as important to cosmic balance as it is to human history. The human and the divine are intertwined in these stories. Abraham's story takes place on earth, but Melchizedek works on many levels, connecting what people can see with what is beyond their perception. His being in Salem, his blessing of Abraham, and his receiving of tithes are all signs of a much bigger mission. The Ethiopian texts stress that he is a priest forever, that his purpose was set in stone, and that his power is universal. He is a living example of the idea that divine order needs both visible action and unseen oversight, and that some people are tools of God's will across time, space, and history. The depiction of Melchizedek as pre-existent, eternal, and cosmic alters our comprehension of priesthood, authority, and divine mission. He is more than just a historical figure. He is a link between heaven and earth, a stabilizer of spiritual order, and a witness to God's plan as it unfolds. The Ethiopian texts urge readers to transcend the confines of human perception, acknowledge the often concealed workings of divine authority, and recognize that figures such as Melchizedek fulfill roles that extend beyond immediate visibility. This canon preserves his story, which challenges assumptions and helps us understand how the eternal and the temporal interact and how divine will is maintained throughout creation in ways that are only beginning to be understood by humans. Abraham had fought in battles with smoke and fire, and his heart raced from the clash of kings, the cries of men, and the weight of his families and his own possessions. Lot had been taken, and Abraham, who was determined but tired, chased the kidnappers through rough terrain, seeking justice and following God's orders with unyielding determination. He met Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High, right after he won and was bringing back spoils and knowing that his family had been saved. The scene is calm compared to the chaos that came before it, but it has a weight that will last for hundreds of years. Abraham, a brave and faithful man, is now in the presence of someone whose power comes not from armies or victories, but from God. The first thing Abraham sees is how calm and peaceful Melchizedek is. He comes up to him with respect, knowing that this is not like any other man he has met on the battlefield or in council meetings. He has a spiritual aura about him, an unseen weight that makes him look like someone who speaks for a higher power. Melchizedek immediately brings out bread and wine, which are simple but deep symbols. The act is more than just being nice. It's a sacred gesture that foreshadows the rituals and blessings that would later become a big part of spiritual practice. At that moment, Abraham realizes that the meeting was not a coincidence. This blessing is a sign of his faith, obedience, and the divine favor that has helped him win battles. There is an emotional and spiritual tension as Melchizedek blesses Abraham. Abraham has just come back from a war where life and death were decided by swords and plans. Here, though, victory is not based on military power but on spiritual authority. He bows, which is a sign of respect and recognition, and gives Melchizedek a tenth of all he has. The tithing is more than just giving money. It is a way of showing respect for the eternal priesthood by giving up some of your earthly gains. This action connects the human and the divine, as well as the temporary and the eternal. This is a time when faith and blessing come together. Abraham's faith in God is met by an intermediary whose presence strengthens the divine plan. The meeting also shows how deep Abraham's feelings were on his journey. He has faced hardship, loss, fear, and doubt, but he walks into this meeting with both courage and humility. The blessing from Melchizedek is not just a formal ritual. It is a way of recognizing Abraham's journey, his faith, and the decisions that have brought him to this point. In silence, there is a deep conversation, an understanding that goes beyond words. Abraham gets validation not for the spoils of war, but for following God's will. This interaction has a lot of spiritual weight because it connects human effort with divine favor. It shows that victories in life are not only won on the battlefield, but also through obedience, faith, and alignment with a higher purpose. The priesthood of Melchizedek and the giving of tithes are full of different meanings. Melchizedek embodies an everlasting priesthood that transcends human lineage and temporal authority. His blessing means that God's favor has been given to Abraham, which shows that his actions are guided by more than human understanding. Giving a tenth of Abraham's spoils as a tithe shows that all earthly gain ultimately belongs to God and must be returned to show respect for God's authority. In this one act, the text shows themes of humility, thankfulness, and how human effort and spiritual order come together. Abraham's obedience shows that true faith recognizes God's authority and that being successful in life is tied to being morally and spiritually responsible. This meeting also shows how two different but complementary roles, the warrior and the priest, come together. Abraham represents bravery, action, and faith in action, while Melchizedek represents spiritual power, guidance, and blessing. Their interaction illustrates the principle that human efforts necessitate divine approval, asserting that triumphs are inadequate without recognition of a greater purpose. You can feel the tension in the scene. Abraham is physically exhausted and triumphant, while Melchizedek is calm and timeless. It is a moment full of meaning, when earthly success is compared to eternal truths and when blessings come from recognizing that you are in line with God's will. Even the bread and wine, which are very simple, have a lot of meaning. These simple things, given by a priest whose origins are unknown and eternal, become a real link between heaven and earth. Abraham gets food and a sign of spiritual nourishment, which reminds him that human successes are connected to God's care. The text implies that spiritual authority legitimizes human actions when aligned with divine principles. By giving a tenth of his spoils, Abraham shows that he understands the bigger picture and that all achievements, whether they are material or not, are ultimately up to God. The emotional depth of the encounter is powerful because it is both personal and universal. Abraham is a character that people can relate to. He is a leader, a warrior, and a man of faith who faces problems and uncertainty. Melchizedek, on the other hand, stands for the eternal and divine, the unseen forces that help and bless human efforts. Their meeting shows a universal truth, that God's plan is to connect people and that blessings often come through people who are not normally seen. The tension, humility, and recognition in the scene make it easy for people to relate to it. It makes them think about how spiritual guidance and divine favor work in their own lives. When you tell the story again, you remember that the meeting between Abraham and Melchizedek is not just a historical event. It is also a lesson. It shows how important it is to be humble in front of authority, to see the divine order, and to put faith into action every day. The tithing, the blessing, and the quiet but deep interaction show that spiritual rewards often come after following God's will, recognizing it, and aligning with it. This encounter confirms Abraham's journey so far, which has been full of struggle, faith, and resilience. It shows that human effort is linked to spiritual guidance and that blessings are often given and received when people are humble and recognize and acknowledge them. The Ethiopian tradition goes even further with this story, stressing Melchizedek's eternal priesthood and cosmic role. But even in the King James story, the meeting shows what spiritual recognition, giving and receiving blessings, and the idea that true authority, whether human or divine, goes hand in hand with obedience, faith, and moral integrity. Abraham's story, set against the backdrop of Melchizedek's eternal presence, vividly illustrates the intersection of faith and blessing, a moment where human history and divine purpose converge in an indelible scene. The King James Bible depicts Melchizedek as an enigmatic character whose fleeting presence has significant ramifications, especially in his interpretation as a precursor to Christ. The blessing of Abraham and his eternal priesthood in Hebrews are regarded as a prefiguration of the supreme priesthood of Jesus, a correlation that theologians have historically recognized for its profound symbolism. In terms of the story, Melchizedek's role is short, but the typology in his actions helps us understand how the Old and New Covenants are connected. He embodies the convergence of kingship and priesthood, a figure whose authority is divinely sanctioned and eternal, foreshadowing the ultimate priest and mediator of salvation. In this sense, he is more than just a historical figure. He is a symbol of God's eternal plan and the Messiah, who represents both spiritual authority and divine blessing. The Ethiopian Bible broadens this typology, attributing a significantly greater prophetic importance to Melchizedek. Instead of being blessed at one point in time, the texts show him as a person whose mission is connected to the unfolding of God's plan for redemption over time. He is portrayed as a prophet whose existence predates human history, whose understanding of divine purpose is extensive, and whose actions influence humanity in ways that resonate through generations. His priesthood is eternal and closely linked to the ultimate realization of salvation, suggesting a messianic role that is part of the cosmic order. The Ethiopian canon stresses that he is not just a figure in a theological sense. He is an active part of God's plan. He is a prophet whose actions point to and prepare the way for the Messiah, connecting events from the past to the future fulfillment of God's promises. The prophetic importance of Melchizedek in the Ethiopian texts is closely linked to his eternal priesthood and authority that existed before him. The Ethiopian texts describe him as a being who knows God's overall plan, the path to salvation, and Christ's future role. The KJV, on the other hand, leaves a lot of his origin and purpose unexplained. This prophetic foresight affects how he interacts with Abraham and others. It shows that his priesthood is not just ceremonial or symbolic, but also functional and part of God's plan. His blessings and guidance are part of a continuum that goes from the order before creation to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise. This supports the idea that some people in the Bible are both historical figures and prophetic instruments of God's will. The link between Melchizedek and salvation is clear in the way he brings God's blessings to people. By blessing Abraham, he not only shows that he trusts and obeys God, but he also takes part in the passing on of spiritual favor that is the basis of God's promises in the covenant. This act has prophetic significance, indicating the ongoing nature of God's plan for humanity. The Ethiopian texts add to this by showing Melchizedek as a guide who makes sure that important events happen as God wants them to. He is more than just an observer. He actively aligns human action with spiritual destiny. This makes him both a type of Christ and a prophetic agent whose role foreshadows the Messiah's ultimate mission to bring redemption and reconciliation. The symbolism inherent in his priesthood enhances his typological and prophetic importance. He is an eternal priest who works outside of lineage and temporal authority, just like Christ's eternal priesthood in Hebrews. This is similar to the story of salvation, which shows that God's authority and spiritual mediation are not limited by human institutions. In this way, Melchizedek serves as a bridge between human experience and God's plan, a channel through which God's will flows and a hint of what the Messiah will do in the future. His presence demonstrates that salvation is not an abrupt intervention but a gradual process, with prophetic figures directing the trajectory of history in accordance with God's will. In Ethiopian tradition, Melchizedek's prophetic nature is strengthened by his interactions with other spiritual and human figures. He is portrayed as a guide, counselor, and observer of the manifestation of divine purpose. He acts on purpose, with foresight and in line with God's overall plan. By blessing Abraham, he shows that the patriarch's faith is real, sets a standard for tithing and spiritual recognition, and shows how human obedience can lead to God's favor. Each of these actions possesses a prophetic aspect, indicating that Melchizedek's priesthood and authority are dynamic forces that influence the course of salvation history. The typology that points to Christ in the KJV and the expanded prophetic meaning in the Ethiopian texts come together to give us a full picture of Melchizedek's role. He is a historical person, a symbol, and a prophet whose actions point to the coming of the Messiah. His eternal priesthood represents the unbroken chain of divine authority, and his blessings and guidance show how prophetic mediation makes sure that God's promises come true. The Ethiopian canon shows him in many different ways, which helps readers understand how important he is. It makes it clear that his presence is both timeless and purposeful, directly connected to salvation and the ultimate realization of God's plan for humanity. This dual role of type and prophet shows how Scripture can work on many levels. Melchizedek is a type of Christ that shows how the eternal priesthood and divine authority would be fully realized in the Messiah. Conversely, he serves as an active prophetic presence, directing and influencing events to guarantee the alignment of God's plan with divine intention. This combination reinforces the idea that some people in the Bible can only be understood through one lens. They are historical, symbolic, and prophetic all at once, teaching lessons that apply to all generations and all spiritual levels. Melchizedek represents the merging of God's plan and human experience through his role as a priest, his prophetic guidance, and his symbolic link to Christ. His interactions with Abraham, his eternal role, and his prophetic foresight show that salvation is not just an event, but a carefully planned process in which God uses certain people to change the course of history. The Ethiopian texts enhance this comprehension, illustrating that his influence is perpetual, his role intentional, and his presence indispensable to the realization of God's plan. After reading these stories, it's clear that Melchizedek is more than just a person from the past. He is a living symbol of the eternal priesthood, prophetic insight, and divine preparation that points to the Messiah and the ultimate fulfillment of salvation. When looking at the story of Melchizedek, one of the most interesting things is what the King James Bible chooses to say and what it doesn't. The KJV, which is known for its shortness and consistency in theology, makes Melchizedek seem almost like a passing figure in Genesis 14, a king of Salem, a priest of God Most High, giving Abraham bread and wine and blessing him. Not much else is said about where he came from, what he was meant to do, or how deep his spiritual authority is. Scholars and readers have long pointed out this flaw, knowing that the shortness of the text leaves many questions unanswered. The omission is not always due to carelessness. It is often the result of translation choices, cultural priorities at the time, and the canon limitations that shape the text. Translators often put narrative clarity and doctrinal conformity ahead of keeping esoteric or mystical elements in mind when making a Bible for a wide audience. Melchizedek's cosmic role and pre-existent nature may have been seen as too complicated, too mysterious, or too difficult for a general audience. The translators of the King James Bible were influenced by certain historical and religious ideas. The Hebrew, Greek, and Latin manuscripts, they had helped them make decisions, but there were always going to be gaps. The Ethiopian Bible has a lot of stories and explanations that didn't make it into the Western tradition, especially in books that aren't part of the KJV's standard 66-book canon. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church keeps texts like Jubilees, 1 Enoch, and other works that give us a better understanding of people like Melchizedek. These texts talk about how he existed before he was created, how he interacted with angels, and how he is still a part of the divine order. The KJV does not include any of this information. The differences show that translation is not just about language, it's also about how we choose to pass on knowledge. The choices we make about what to include, leave out, and emphasize have a big impact on how we understand biblical figures. The Ethiopian Bible keeps these extra details, which many scholars call hidden wisdom. This wisdom is not just stories or history. It gives a bigger spiritual context for understanding the story. Melchizedek's everlasting priesthood, his role before creation, and his cosmic authority all show how God's plan has unfolded over time, how priests mediate between God and people, and how divine order works. People who read the KJV might see him as a type of Christ and appreciate the theological symbolism, but they might not know how much Ethiopian texts add to his story, showing him as a prophetic, eternal figure whose actions affect both the earthly and heavenly realms. These narratives imply that certain elements of biblical history were deliberately preserved within specific traditions, possibly to sustain a profound spiritual comprehension that could direct the faithful beyond mere doctrine. The gaps in the KJV also have an effect on research. When researchers study the history and theology of the Bible, they have to deal with incomplete information if they only use Western canons. Questions regarding Melchizedek's origin, the nature of his priesthood, and the broader implications of his actions remain speculative unless one examines the additional texts preserved in the Ethiopian tradition. These omissions have sparked centuries of debate, interpretation, and reinterpretation. Scholars aiming for a comprehensive understanding must juxtapose texts from various traditions, recognizing that translation and canon formation are inherently biased processes. They shape the story, bring out some parts, and hide others. To understand how this works, you need to know how deep biblical knowledge may have been in earlier or different text traditions. For those looking for spiritual growth, these differences are just as important. The KJV shows Melchizedek as meeting Abraham and being a symbol of Christ's eternal priesthood, but it doesn't say anything about the bigger cosmic and prophetic aspects. The Ethiopian Bible, on the other hand, shows Melchizedek as being very much a part of God's plan, guiding events and keeping spiritual order. This comprehension can transform a believer's perspective on faith, authority, and divine intercession. It shows that the Bible is not just a record of history, but also a living storehouse of wisdom, where people like Melchizedek work on levels that are beyond human understanding and where spiritual insight can be found by reading preserved texts that are sometimes hidden. Keeping such hidden knowledge safe also shows how important cultural and historical context is in shaping religious texts. The Ethiopian Church had a canon that included 81 to 88 books, which is a lot more than the 66 books in the KJV. These extra books weren't just extras. They were an important part of the community's spiritual and theological worldview. They have stories, prophecies, and cosmological insights that help us understand people like Melchizedek in ways that the KJV does not. The Ethiopian tradition keeps these texts, which adds depth and richness to readers' understanding of biblical characters and their roles in the divine plan. So, translation is more than just a technical task. It changes how we see things. When some texts are left out, whole areas of understanding are lost or hidden. Melchizedek's lack of information about his eternal priesthood, existence before creation, and cosmic influence in the KJV makes it harder for readers to understand how important he is. The Ethiopian Bible's preservation of these elements enables a more comprehensive understanding of the figure, depicting him as historical and eternal, human and divine, terrestrial and cosmic. It shows that Scripture can work on many levels at once, giving us historical stories, theological insights, and spiritual revelations all at once. The consequences for academia and spiritual comprehension are significant. Scholars must recognize that canonical constraints influence historical interpretation, and spiritual seekers may enhance their comprehension of divine order, priesthood, and prophecy by engaging with texts beyond the KJV. In this way, the Ethiopian Bible serves as a storehouse of lost or hidden knowledge, linking the visible story to the spiritual framework that is not visible. The story of Melchizedek shows that some truths in the Bible are layered, with different traditions keeping different parts of his life and role. To fully understand his importance, you need to read these larger texts. They show a level of divine planning and wisdom that goes beyond any one canon. The difference between the KJV and the Ethiopian Bible shows how translation and canon formation can affect how people see things, how they study, and how they gain spiritual insight. The KJV is clear and short, but the Ethiopian texts are rich and deep, keeping details that help us understand Melchizedek's priesthood, prophetic role, and cosmic importance. Readers and scholars are invited to contemplate the seen and unseen, the revealed and concealed, reminding us that the narrative of Melchizedek transcends a singular historical event, embodying a timeless, universal essence that connects the human and divine, the past and future, and the visible and hidden domains in the Ethiopian biblical tradition. Melchizedek's role encompasses much more than his earthly interactions with Abraham and his brief mention in Genesis 14. He is portrayed as a being of great cosmic importance, situated within a hierarchy that encompasses angels, watchers, and other spiritual entities whose responsibilities span the domains of heaven and earth. These texts imply that his priesthood is not solely ceremonial but fundamentally engaged in preserving the divine order of the cosmos. Ethiopian sources focus more on Melchizedek's role as an active agent in spiritual governance, whose influence goes beyond what most people can see. This is different from Western Christian interpretations, which mostly see him as a typological figure pointing to Christ. People say that when he is around, he is both commanding and gentle, both authoritative and full of divine compassion. This means that he follows rules that balance judgment, guidance, and protection. Melchizedek's dealings with the angelic hierarchy show how special he is. He is not just one of many, nor is he lower than other heavenly beings in the usual sense. Instead, he acts as a bridge between the divine and the earthly, helping other spiritual beings while making sure that what they do fits with God's ultimate plan. The Ethiopian texts say that he made laws to keep the harmony of creation, watched over the watchers, angelic beings whose job it is to watch, teach, and sometimes get involved in human affairs, and talked about the complexities of divine justice and mercy. His job is both to keep things in order and to protect them, making sure that the cosmic order stays stable while the divine plan unfolds on time. This view of him shows that he is not only a priest but also a cosmic steward whose power keeps spiritual and temporal events going in the right direction. The meaning behind Melchizedek's cosmic duties is deep. He exemplifies the concept that spiritual authority is simultaneously relational and hierarchical, connecting divine intent with human agency and angelic oversight. As a priest, he is in charge of spiritual laws, enforcing divine decrees, and protecting souls. This makes him a link between the human and the eternal. The focus on his eternal nature in Ethiopian texts shows that his authority is always there, never fades, and is given by God. In contrast to Western Christian interpretations, where Melchizedek is often viewed primarily through typology and foreshadowing, his cosmic significance remains largely unexamined or regarded as allegorical. The Ethiopian view makes him a real person with real spiritual power and responsibility, not just a symbol. Melchizedek's cosmic role also includes interacting with watchers, who are angelic beings whose job it is to watch over humans and step in when needed to guide or correct them. These watchers work within strict rules to make sure that the divine order is followed while also having an effect on human events. But Melchizedek is in a special supervisory role among them. He is called both a guide and a judge because he can tell them what to do and help them understand how their work fits into God's bigger plan. In this way, he is both spiritually wise and in charge of operations, acting as a bridge between God's will and action in the heavens. His relationship with the Watchers shows how Ethiopians believe that everything in the universe is connected and works together under God's control. When you think about the spiritual meaning that people give him, his cosmic duties go even further. In Ethiopian writings, Melchizedek is linked to the spread of knowledge, the protection of sacred law, and the balance of spiritual energies across different realms. He serves as a protector of divine secrets, keeping safe mysteries that most people can't understand. This makes him a revered figure whose presence ensures that divine wisdom flows through the cosmos in the right way, affecting not only events on Earth but also the spiritual realities that support creation itself. Every blessing, decree, or intervention ascribed to him encompasses multiple meanings, intertwining ethical, spiritual, and cosmic dimensions in ways that contest traditional interpretations of priesthood and authority. The difference with how Western Christians see things is very clear. In the KJV and other Western traditions, Melchizedek is mostly a typological figure. His eternal priesthood is important, but mostly in the context of Christology rather than cosmology. Western interpretations concentrate on his appearance, the blessing of Abraham, and the theological ramifications for comprehending Jesus' eternal priesthood. The Ethiopian texts, on the other hand, put him at the center of a much bigger spiritual story. In this context, he is not only a precursor to Christ but also an active participant in the arrangement of cosmic order, connecting the worlds of angels, watchers, and people. This broader perspective posits that comprehending Melchizedek necessitates an examination of both human history and the very framework of spirituality. His position among angels and watchers carries moral and spiritual significance. He makes sure that divine justice is upheld and that people's lives follow God's plan by keeping an eye on these spiritual agents. He is a stabilizing force in a universe that could become unbalanced without direction. This view of Melchizedek shows how important it is for Ethiopians to see how everything is connected. The cosmos, spiritual hierarchies, and human choices are all connected, and his priesthood works at the crossroads of all three. The Ethiopian texts show him as actively shaping the moral and spiritual fabric of existence, which is different from interpretations that see him as a symbol of things to come. This shows how dynamic and participatory divine authority is. Melchizedek's cosmic authority is exemplified by his impact on temporal occurrences. His interventions are subtle but have a big impact, making sure that Abraham's encounter, human history, and spiritual growth all fit with God's plan. He acts as a conduit for divine will, illustrating that priesthood, in its entirety, encompasses stewardship of both spiritual and temporal domains. The Ethiopian viewpoint posits that the eternal and the temporal are interconnected, with figures such as Melchizedek serving as exemplars of this principle, illustrating that human history is inextricably linked to divine orchestration and cosmic supervision. This view of Melchizedek broadens the definition of priesthood beyond just rituals and ceremonies. He is a protector, a go-between, a teacher, and a rulemaker in the cosmic hierarchy. His presence confirms the idea that spiritual authority comes with responsibility, that divine wisdom must be put into action, and that eternal figures are not just distant symbols but also agents whose work keeps creation in harmony. The Ethiopian texts contest the Western inclination to interpret Melchizedek predominantly through typology, encouraging readers to perceive him as a fully actualized cosmic participant whose priesthood and authority transcend time, space, and spiritual dimensions. Through this lens, Melchizedek's story becomes more than just a meeting with Abraham. It shows us how the universe is built by God. He connects heaven and earth, angels and people, prophecy and the priesthood. This shows that the cosmic hierarchy is not just a concept, but something that people live, do, and need to do in order to carry out God's plan. His presence among angels and watchers strengthens the Ethiopian view of spiritual order, which is one that is eternal, purposeful, and actively maintained by those chosen to work at the intersection of divine authority and human history. In the Ethiopian biblical tradition, Melchizedek is depicted as both a historical or cosmic entity and a prophetic figure whose impact extends into the eschatological period. The King James Bible only gives a few hints in Psalms and Hebrews about his eternal priesthood and importance. In contrast, the Ethiopian texts make a clear connection between him and events that will happen at the end of time, making him a key figure in God's ultimate plan for humanity. These texts talk about a time when spiritual order will need to be restored, divine justice and blessing will need to be reaffirmed, and Melchizedek's authority will be needed to guide both human and spiritual matters. This prophetic role shows that he is still important and that his presence is not limited to the past. It still has an effect on the present and will have a big effect on the future. The Ethiopian Bible shows Melchizedek as a priest who connects the past with the future by bridging the gap between times of divine intervention and the end times. His blessings and guidance, which once guided Abraham's journey, are now seen as having a greater cosmic purpose. He acts as a go-between, making sure that God's plan happens the way God wants it to, especially when things are spiritually and morally difficult. The texts say that in the last days, he will be more visible, which will be a sign to people that divine authority and intervention are still at work, even when things are going wrong. This depiction stresses continuity by showing that the eternal priesthood is not just a symbol but is actively involved in running and restoring both the spiritual and physical worlds. One of the most important parts of Melchizedek's prophetic role is bringing people back to God. Ethiopian texts often say that the end times will be full of confusion, division, and moral decay. They also say that important spiritual leaders, like Melchizedek, will help people get back in line with divine order. His priesthood acts as a corrective force, bringing back faith, blessings, and knowledge that have been lost or hidden over the years. This fits with the Ethiopian Canon's bigger theological picture, which says that spiritual authorities are always working to keep God's will and make sure that human history moves forward according to a plan that has already been set. Melchizedek's interventions are not sporadic or symbolic. They are strategic, demonstrating a continuous obligation to uphold spiritual balance and facilitate the path to ultimate realization. The link to end-time prophecy also shows a deeper understanding of how the universe works. In Ethiopian tradition, Melchizedek is part of a hierarchy of spiritual beings, such as angels and watchers, whose actions have an impact on both the physical and spiritual worlds. In the last days, his prophetic authority will be especially important for making sure that these beings do what God wants them to do. This vision is very different from how Western Christians usually see Melchizedek, who is often seen as a typological precursor to Christ with little direct connection to eschatology. In contrast, the Ethiopian texts depict him as a living agent whose involvement in prophecy and the end times is both dynamic and transformative, guaranteeing the fulfillment of divine intention despite human uncertainty and spiritual turmoil. The Ethiopian portrayal stresses that prophecy is more than just telling the future, it is also taking part in it. In the last days, Melchizedek will help leaders, bless the faithful, and keep the spiritual forces in balance. His presence serves as a reminder that divine authority works through people who have both knowledge and responsibility. This role fits with his cosmic importance in earlier stories, showing that his priesthood is naturally connected to order, governance, and the unfolding of God's plan. The texts show a theological principle by linking his past actions to end-time prophecy, that eternal priesthood is both timeless and adaptable, able to meet the spiritual needs of people at any point in history. The KJV references, while not very clear, suggest that this is a bigger deal. Psalms 110 says that there will always be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews goes into more detail by comparing Christ's eternal priesthood to Melchizedek's. The Western canon does not directly address end-time interventions. However, these passages offer a theological foundation upon which the Ethiopian tradition is constructed. The Ethiopian texts interpret these indications as signs of ongoing influence, implying that Melchizedek's eternal priesthood is not fixed but perpetually active, extending into the concluding chapters of human history. This interpretation enhances the spiritual significance of the priesthood, linking it not only to Christ but also to the broader realization of divine prophecy. The prophetic aspect of Melchizedek underscores the relationship between priesthood and ethical direction. Ethiopian texts say that in the last days, people will go through tests that test their faith, obedience, and spiritual insight. Melchizedek's presence makes sure that divine wisdom is always available to help those who want to follow God's plan. His role is both comforting and authoritative, giving people both direction and responsibility. He is a stabilizing force, reminding people that God's plan is still in place even when they don't understand it. This supports the idea that prophecy is more than just telling the future. It also shapes events and leads the faithful to their spiritual goals. Another important part is the cosmic symbolism that goes along with his prophetic work. Melchizedek's actions are shown to have an effect on both the physical and spiritual worlds, showing how the two worlds are connected. The Ethiopian texts say that his power at the end of time will show itself in ways that protect God's justice, share spiritual knowledge, and make sure that important events happen as God planned. These interventions are not random. They are planned, in line with the eternal priesthood he represents, and necessary to keep the course of salvation history on track. By showing him this way, the texts say that some people work at a level of divine coordination that is beyond what humans can understand. In the end, Melchizedek's prophetic role in the Ethiopian Bible connects history, eternity, and eschatology. He connects events from the past with events that will happen in the future, showing that God's plan is still in effect and that God's authority is still strong. He shows that prophecy is very useful by being a priest, guiding angels, and getting involved in human affairs. This aligns human action with spiritual law and makes sure that divine intention is carried out over time. The Ethiopian tradition portrays Melchizedek as a historical priest, a cosmic mediator, and a prophetic figure whose influence persists into the final days, directing the faithful and paving the way for ultimate restoration. Melchizedek has long been a person of interest, debate, and even controversy. His identity and role have raised questions that are still not answered today, from the earliest days of biblical scholarship to modern theological discussions. The King James Bible gives a short description of him. He is a priest of God Most High and the king of Salem who blesses Abraham. This brief account, though theologically important in Christian typology, doesn't explain much. His origin, cosmic significance, and eternal priesthood are mostly missing from the story. Scholars in the Western tradition have contended whether he was a historical entity, a symbolic archetype, or a theophany, an incarnation of God in human form. Every interpretation has consequences for theology, Christology, and biblical comprehension, and these discussions frequently disclose more about the interpreter's perspective than about Melchizedek himself. The Ethiopian Bible, on the other hand, gives a more complete and broad picture of Melchizedek that goes against these traditional Western readings. Ethiopian texts say that he existed before time, was always meant to be, and was deeply involved in both earthly and cosmic events. His priesthood is not just a temporary or symbolic role. It is fully functional and guides both spiritual and human areas. In this tradition, Melchizedek is more than a link to Christ. He is a powerful figure whose power goes beyond time and space. This has caused problems between Western and Ethiopian interpretations. The first focuses on typology and prophecy, while the second sees him as a central, lasting figure with clear cosmic duties. The differences between these points of view have led to arguments among scholars, clergy, and lay readers. Each side is trying to figure out what is real, what should be in the canon, and what should come first in theology. Many historical arguments are about who he is in Genesis 14. Western scholars have observed the absence of genealogy or origin information, prompting speculation that Melchizedek may symbolize a Canaanite priest-king, a divine manifestation, or a literary device intended to enhance Abraham's narrative. The vagueness allows for different interpretations, and these interpretations often fit with larger religious beliefs. Protestant scholars, for example, have focused on his role as a typological precursor to Christ, using Psalms 110 and Hebrews 7 as proof that Jesus fulfilled an eternal priesthood. Roman Catholic and Orthodox interpretations often reconcile typology with historical analysis, occasionally positing that Melchizedek represents facets of divine mystery that remain inadequately elucidated. Each perspective, while providing insight, conveys a sense of incompleteness, emphasizing the deficiencies that Ethiopian texts aim to address. The Ethiopian viewpoint adds another layer of controversy by questioning widely accepted canonical limits. The Ethiopian tradition situates Melchizedek within a more expansive narrative of cosmic and historical importance by referencing Jubilees, 1 Enoch, and other texts not included in most Western Bibles. These texts depict him as a pre-existent entity who engages with angelic hierarchies, impacts divine law, and actively contributes to the administration of human history. These assertions have engendered skepticism among scholars who are either unacquainted with or reluctant to embrace the comprehensive Ethiopian canon. Critics frequently contend that augmenting Melchizedek's role in this manner jeopardizes the incorporation of extra-biblical interpretations into canonical narratives. However, proponents assert that the Ethiopian tradition safeguards knowledge that has been lost or obscured in Western translations. Contemporary scholarship also examines the ramifications of these differences for theology and religious practice. In Western contexts, Melchizedek is frequently referenced in sermons and theological writings as a representation of Christ, a symbol of eternal priesthood, or an illustration of divine favor. His narrative is typically situated within moral, liturgical, or Christological contexts, emphasizing the lessons derived from his encounter with Abraham regarding faith, obedience, and God's salvific plan. In Ethiopian contexts, however, his narrative possesses practical spiritual significance. Adherents perceive him as an active participant in cosmic order, a figure whose influence shapes prayer, spiritual guidance, and the comprehension of divine authority. The distinction between symbolic and operational roles alters the manner in which communities engage with Scripture, influencing prayer practices, liturgy, and theological imagination. People who lived in the northern lands had always heard stories about a place where the sun never rose. These stories were passed down from father to son and mother to daughter. Peleg, who was now an adult and remembered how the earth was split, could hardly imagine a world like that. People said it was a place where it was always dark, where warmth and light never reached, and where cold winds blew across empty mountains and frozen plains all the time. The elders talked about it with respect and caution, saying that few people who went there ever came back, and those who did were forever changed, bringing stories of shadows that were deeper than night itself. The darkness in the north wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It was a place where the lines between heaven and earth seemed to blur, and you could feel the hand of divine judgment in every cold gust. Some of Noah's descendants, driven by curiosity and need, tried to travel north generations after the flood. Brave, or maybe foolish, families set out hoping to find new lands, fertile soil, or hidden knowledge that had been lost since the flood. They brought food, tools, and prayers, but the land itself seemed to fight back. In some places, rivers flowed backwards, ice sheets moved in ways that were hard to predict, and the sun's rays never reached their eyes. The dark sky was always there, casting long, creepy shadows over the rough ground. People who lived through it said they saw strange lights in the distance, like fire dancing on mountaintops or the glimmer of cities hidden under the ice. But these stories always had an air of fear about them, reminding people that this northern world wasn't meant for normal people. At the same time, Ethiopian traditions kept an even stranger story alive. A kingdom beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, in a place so far away that few maps dared to show it. This southern kingdom was very rich, had strange plants, and had huge cities built by people we don't know. But it was also a place of warnings. Legends said that tribes would wander into its borders and never come back. Their spirits would stay in liminal spaces, caught between the human world and the divine. The southern kingdom was full of movement and sound, unlike the dark north. However, it had a strange power that could scare even the bravest travelers. People said that its leaders had knowledge passed down from the Watchers themselves, from before the flood, that people weren't ready to use yet. Families who wanted these lands had to go through tests that tested their faith and strength. Some southern expeditions came across huge buildings, huge pillars, and walls with symbols on them that they couldn't figure out. The elders had always talked about remnants of giants and cities that had been swallowed by floods or hidden under protective spells. Now those stories were real, and they were terrifying. Even the strongest men and women were afraid to go any further because they felt like someone was watching, guiding, or warning them away. The line between danger and discovery was very thin. This was a reminder that the world after the flood, even though it seemed settled, still held secrets from before humanity was saved. These lands were both interesting and scary to Peleg and his peers. The cold, dark north stood for how weak people are and how limited their earthly goals are. The southern kingdom was beautiful but dangerous, and it stood for the temptation of forbidden knowledge and the powers that had once led to humanity's downfall. Elders told stories of early tribes going too far and getting lost, starving, or being affected by unseen forces. All that was left behind were signs of their presence, like an abandoned village, scattered tools, or the odd skeleton. These warnings weren't just based on superstition. They were based on memories, both spiritual and historical, that were woven into the moral fabric of humanity after the flood. As kids, they heard stories about these strange places that sparked their imaginations with descriptions of cities in the south that were always dark or cities that were always dark. They would ask their parents what was beyond the rivers, mountains, and seas they knew about. Their elders would answer with serious warnings, telling them that they should always be curious but also respect the limits set by God. Peleg felt both proud and sad as he watched these reactions. He was proud that people could still dream and explore, but sad that some dreams could never come true without risk. But the stories went on, linking generations and tying them to the world's vast, unknown mysteries. As explorers tried to find their way to these areas, the land itself seemed to be full of warnings. Travelers in the north were confused by sudden storms of snow and wind, which made paths disappear or change overnight. Caves that looked safe would fall in, and ice fields would split open into huge holes. In the south, thick forests and rivers made it hard to get around, and strange sounds echoed through valleys as if the earth itself were talking. Peleg and his friends, who had seen the flood and the splitting of continents, could only be amazed at how strong nature is and how people have shaped the land on purpose. It was a world where geography and religion were connected, and exploring was as much a spiritual test as a physical one. People who went to the Forbidden Lands and came back were never the same. People who survived the northern darkness told stories of feelings of loneliness so strong that they said they felt cut off from time and memory. People from the southern kingdom told stories of huge cities, grand temples, and treasures buried deep in the ground. They also warned about the dangers of pride, moral temptation, and the heavy burden of ancient knowledge. These stories made their way back to the villages along the rivers and valleys, where they sparked awe, fear, and a cautious curiosity in the next generation. The world after the flood was no longer one earth that could be traveled. It was a place with visible and hidden limits, dangers, and boundaries. Melchizedek's story shows that faith is also very relational. The encounter with Abraham illustrates that divine encounters are seldom solitary events. They transpire within the framework of relationships, obligations, and reciprocal acknowledgement. Melchizedek's blessing is not meaningless. It is significant because it is given to a man who has shown bravery, leadership, and dedication. This relational aspect of faith encourages believers to see spiritual growth as a process that involves interactions, guidance, and shared experiences, not just something they do on their own. Spiritual maturity is developed not solely through individual devotion, but also through interaction with individuals who serve as conduits of divine wisdom. The Ethiopian texts elaborate on these themes, illustrating that Melchizedek's life exemplifies a paradigm of the synthesis between terrestrial duty and universal consciousness. His actions remind readers that moral and spiritual lessons often show up in ways that are small but have a big impact. By watching his life, believers are inspired to think about how they can be channels for higher values in their own communities. The call is to live out faith in real and useful ways, like being a leader, a teacher, or doing good deeds and standing up for what's right. This is similar to the balance of spiritual authority and human engagement that Melchizedek shows. Another aspect of the spiritual lesson is having faith and patience in God's timing. The meeting between Abraham and Melchizedek happens at a very important time after a lot of fighting and hardship. This shows that divine insight often comes after hard work and preparation. This shows that spiritual growth requires facing challenges, setbacks, and times of doubt. When believers are patient and discerning, they can see and act on divine guidance when it comes to them. In this sense, trust is not blind. It is based on what you have seen, done, and are willing to do in line with what you think is morally and spiritually true. Thinking about Melchizedek's example also shows how important moral courage is. Melchizedek shows that he is willing to responsibly and ethically use his spiritual authority by acting quickly to bless Abraham and uphold his priestly duties. Abraham's actions show this kind of bravery, which shows that faith requires both accepting guidance and taking the initiative to live it out. Modern believers can learn from this a principle of integrity, that spiritual insight must be paired with moral action, that faith is shown through deeds, and that ethical courage is needed to deal with the difficulties of life. Finally, the lessons from Melchizedek's life can be used in your own life. They make people think about how well they follow divine principles, how open they are to guidance, and how aware they are of the unseen forces that shape human experience. People who believe in God are asked to think about how their actions, choices, and interactions show how they understand faith, obedience, and God's plan. You can live your life with both spiritual awareness and practical wisdom if you learn the lessons of discernment, humility, stewardship, and moral courage. Melchizedek's example evolves into a contemporary paradigm for ethical and spiritual behavior, providing guidance that transcends temporal and cultural boundaries. The Ethiopian Bible is different from other holy books because it is old and complete. It also keeps knowledge that has been lost, ignored, or downplayed in Western traditions. Its canon, which has between 81 and 88 books depending on the tradition, has writings that give figures like Melchizedek more depth, context, and explanation than the King James Version does. For hundreds of years, Western scholars have mostly used texts from the narrower canon, which has often led to gaps in understanding or unanswered questions. The Ethiopian Bible, on the other hand, has a lot of historical, spiritual, and cosmic stories that make people want to read the scripture on many levels, including historical, theological, and moral. By looking at these texts, modern readers can see things that aren't obvious about biblical events. They can see that what has been kept in Western translations may only be a small part of a bigger truth. One of the main reasons the Ethiopian Bible is important today is that it keeps hidden wisdom alive. Jubilees, 1 Enoch, and other canonical extensions give clear accounts of events, people, and spiritual hierarchies that are unclear or symbolic in the KJV. These texts depict Melchizedek not merely as a historical priest-king, but as a pre-existent, cosmic entity whose influence transcends temporal and spatial boundaries. For contemporary readers, this information alters our comprehension of spiritual authority, divine intervention, and the interrelation of historical and cosmic occurrences. It contests the idea that Western interpretations offer a comprehensive understanding of biblical narratives and underscores that alternative traditions can enhance comprehension, revealing previously unattainable layers of meaning. The Ethiopian Bible is a gold mine of new ideas for scholars that makes them rethink things they've always thought. Historians and theologians can look at the bigger picture of biblical events thanks to its longer stories. They can ask questions about prophecy, priesthood, and the roles of important people in ways that are hard or impossible to do with just the KJV. For instance, comprehending Melchizedek's cosmic responsibilities or his existence prior to creation facilitates comparative studies, elucidating how ancient societies perceived divine authority and spiritual hierarchy. Scholars acquire historical knowledge and a framework for examining textual transmission, canon formation, and the impact of cultural context on Scripture. By incorporating Ethiopian sources into research, contemporary scholarship can examine the Bible through a more comprehensive perspective, addressing omissions and providing alternative interpretations for enigmas that have confounded generations. The Ethiopian Bible is also very important to people who are looking for spiritual answers. Its stories make you think about your own faith, moral duty, and how well you fit in with God's plan. Figures such as Melchizedek embody a paradigm of obedience, wisdom, and cosmic consciousness, offering concrete instances for modern implementation. For believers, this tradition shows that spiritual authority and divine insight aren't limited to human time or understanding. They work across different dimensions and times. Reading these texts makes you think about the unseen forces that shape human affairs and encourages you to live a moral, intentional life that follows the examples of these amazing people. The Ethiopian Bible's focus on moral action, spiritual discernment, and cosmic awareness gives us practical advice that is still useful today. It gives us principles for dealing with difficult situations with faith and purpose. The Ethiopian Bible is still important today because of how it talks about God's plan and prophecy. Western traditions frequently construe prophecy in limited contexts, focusing on its realization predominantly in the figure of Christ or in specific historical occurrences. The Ethiopian canon, on the other hand, puts prophecy in a larger, more continuous story that links the past, present, and future in ways that show how God is in charge. For example, Melchizedek is not only seen as a forerunner to Christ, but also as someone who actively helps keep divine order, blesses people, and guides them through time. This viewpoint leads believers to think about their own role in the divine plan. It also makes them aware that their actions, moral choices, and spiritual focus all play a role in the larger cosmic and historical stories that are happening. It fosters a perception of interconnectedness, illustrating that human history is inextricably linked to spiritual realities. The Ethiopian Bible is also important because it makes people think critically about Scripture and questions what people think about the authority of texts. Readers are encouraged to consider why some texts were left out, how translations affected how they were understood, and what insights may have been lost along the way. This critical approach does not diminish faith. Instead, it enhances comprehension, fostering informed contemplation and profound spiritual insight. By looking at the differences between Ethiopian and Western traditions, readers can better understand biblical stories, theological ideas, and the complicated history of how the Bible was passed down. This involvement stimulates intellectual and spiritual curiosity, prompting believers to delve deeper, pose inquiries, and pursue a more comprehensive understanding of divine interaction with humanity. Finally, the Ethiopian Bible is still important today because it can help people morally and spiritually renew themselves. Its preservation of concealed narratives, augmented accounts, and cosmic viewpoints encourages adherents to assimilate teachings from figures such as Melchizedek, to contemplate the congruence of their actions with divine principles, and to evaluate the overarching ramifications of faith in quotidian existence. By reading this canon, modern readers connect with a tradition that values obedience, discernment, humility, and spiritual vigilance. These are all important traits in a world that often values speed, efficiency, and surface-level understanding over reflection and honesty. In this way, the Ethiopian Bible is both a historical record and a living guide. It can help people who want to live with awareness, faith, and moral clarity by giving them insight, direction, and inspiration. The story of Melchizedek, as told in both the King James Bible and the Ethiopian Bible, shows a very interesting tension between simplicity and depth, and between shortness and length. The KJV shows him as a priest of God Most High and the king of Salem who blesses Abraham. This is a short but powerful meeting that connects to typology and the coming of Christ. This viewpoint emphasizes the enigmatic and symbolic importance of Melchizedek's priesthood, his association with divine favor, and his function in anticipating everlasting spiritual authority. But even in this short description, there are still questions. Who was Melchizedek in the beginning? How far does his power go? What is the full extent of his priesthood? These questions suggest an underlying complexity that the KJV, either intentionally or due to constraints, does not thoroughly examine. But the Ethiopian Bible adds a whole new level. Its expanded canon depicts Melchizedek as a figure of immense spiritual and cosmic importance, pre-existing and eternal, whose authority transcends earthly interactions and extends into the angelic realm and divine order. In texts like Jubilees and 1 Enoch, he is depicted not merely as a priest but as a cosmic steward, a protector of divine design whose deeds reverberate through history and prophecy. This view changes him from a mysterious historical figure to an active part of God's plan, someone whose priesthood, blessings, and moral authority will last forever. By putting these two points of view next to each other, viewers get a more complete picture of Melchizedek, seeing him as both a symbol of Christ's eternal priesthood and a living part of the cosmic and historical story. The difference between these two pictures has deep emotional and spiritual effects. The KJV makes people think about faith, obedience, and how people can show their respect for God's authority in their lives. Abraham's encounter serves as a reminder to believers that humility and reverence are essential for spiritual growth, and that blessings frequently manifest in unforeseen ways. The Ethiopian Bible builds on these lessons by showing that faith, obedience, and moral courage are not just one-time things. They are things that last through time and space. Melchizedek's life prompts contemplation of the overarching cosmic order, divine orchestration, and the lasting influence of virtuous deeds. By looking at both traditions, viewers are encouraged to think about not only the historical or theological importance of Melchizedek, but also how his story shows universal ideas of justice, wisdom, and spiritual integrity. These lessons are very important in today's world. The story of Melchizedek shows us that we can often find spiritual insight and moral courage when things are hard and we don't know what to do. Abraham met Melchizedek after a fight and struggle, which shows that divine guidance often comes after preparation, perseverance, and attention. In the same way, in modern life, chances to follow higher principles, do the right thing, or get help may come up in small or unexpected ways. Viewers can learn to recognize these moments and respond with humility, generosity, and faith. This will help them internalize timeless principles that promote personal growth and ethical living. The idea of interconnectedness is another important point. From both the KJV and Ethiopian points of view, Melchizedek is the link between God's power and human action. His blessing of Abraham is not an isolated event. It exemplifies a more extensive pattern of divine engagement with creation, human societies, and the cosmic order. This makes me think about how the choices, actions, and moral choices of each person affect bigger spiritual and social realities. People today are encouraged to see their lives as part of a bigger picture, where moral choices, spiritual awareness, and community involvement have effects that go far beyond the present. The story of Melchizedek serves as a guide, showing how following divine principles can change not only one's own fate but also the moral and spiritual path of whole communities. The Ethiopian Bible emphasizes the significance of safeguarding concealed knowledge and challenging preconceived notions. By looking at texts that weren't included in the Western canon, viewers can learn about different stories and deeper parts of biblical history. This method promotes intellectual curiosity, humility, and receptiveness to the depth of spiritual tradition. It also stresses that understanding Scripture is not a one-time thing. It is an ongoing process that gets better with exploration, reflection, and a willingness to look at things from different points of view. In this way, Melchizedek's longer story teaches us how to be discerning by encouraging us to seek knowledge, question our assumptions, and accept the full range of divine wisdom wherever it may be found. The 2 points of view make me feel awe, respect, and hope. Melchizedek's priesthood and cosmic role give us a sense of the sacred that goes beyond time and culture. His life is a good example of bravery, wisdom, and loyalty, traits that speak to people who are trying to figure out tough moral and spiritual issues. The story makes people think about how brave they are morally, how honest they can be, and how they fit into a bigger plan from God. By taking these lessons to heart, viewers can develop a sense of spiritual awareness and moral duty, seeing themselves as active participants in a story that goes on for generations and dimensions. Finally, Melchizedek's story is very important to us today. His story shows how to live by divine principles, have moral courage, and have faith that lasts in a world that is often full of confusion, division, and doubt. It tells people to look for guidance in unexpected places, respect moral and spiritual authority, and be generous, humble, and discerning. The comparison between the KJV and Ethiopian Bible shows that the search for understanding is both historical and spiritual. By looking at things from different points of view, viewers can learn more, strengthen their faith, and connect more deeply with timeless truths. Melchizedek's story is not just about history or theology, it is also very personal and life-changing. By looking at the KJV's symbolic meaning and the Ethiopian Bible's broad view, viewers are encouraged to think, act, and grow. They should incorporate lessons of faith, obedience, cosmic awareness, and moral courage into their everyday lives, viewing each moment as a chance to align with God's will. The story ends with a feeling of empowerment and reflection, reminding people that spiritual understanding is a journey that never ends and that the truths in Scripture, both seen and hidden, have the power to guide, inspire, and change lives for generations. Have you ever stumbled upon a figure in the Bible so enigmatic that even the wisest scholars struggle to explain him? A man who appears briefly, yet carries a presence that shakes the foundation of history and faith alike? This is Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Who was he really? Was he just a historical figure meeting Abraham, or was there something far greater at play? A hidden knowledge, a cosmic mission, a divine purpose we are only beginning to grasp? These are questions that have puzzled minds for millennia, yet they feel urgent even today. Imagine standing on the battlefield with Abraham, fresh from victory when a mysterious king approaches, offering blessings that will echo through eternity. This is not a casual encounter. This is a moment where heaven and earth intersect, where destiny and faith collide. Melchizedek steps into the narrative almost silently, yet the ripples of his presence continue to shape how we understand priesthood, divine order, and the unfolding of God's plan. His story is brief, yet it lingers, demanding that we look closer, think deeper, and question what we think we know about spiritual authority. In a world where people search for meaning and purpose, the mystery of Melchizedek resonates like a whisper from the past. It challenges us to ask, what if the Bible holds layers of wisdom we have yet to uncover? What if figures like Melchizedek were placed in history not just to act, but to teach, guide, and inspire those who seek the truth? The curiosity he sparks is not just intellectual, it is spiritual. It urges us to look beyond the surface, to see patterns, messages, and purposes that are not immediately visible, yet have profound implications for faith and understanding. The King James Bible introduces him as the King of Salem, a priest of God Most High, who meets Abraham after a victorious battle. He blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives him a tithe. From this brief encounter, Hebrews 7 draws a powerful connection, presenting Melchizedek as a type of Christ, an eternal priest whose authority surpasses the lineage of Levi and the laws of Moses. The KJV gives us a glimpse, a shadow of the depth this figure holds. We see his priesthood, yet we do not fully understand his origins, his cosmic role, or the full magnitude of his mission. But the Ethiopian Bible takes us further, revealing hidden layers that most of the world has never seen. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserves a vast canon of 81 to 88 books, including texts like 1 Enoch and Jubilees, which expand on Melchizedek's story in extraordinary ways. Here, he is not just a king or priest, he is a pre-existent, eternal figure whose mission spans the heavens and the earth. He interacts with angels, guides spiritual order, and carries knowledge that has been largely lost to the Western canon. He is depicted as a guardian of divine mysteries, a figure whose role extends far beyond Abraham, whose presence in history was no accident but part of a grander design. The contrast between these two portrayals is striking. The King James Bible offers the tip of the iceberg, a symbolic and theological lens through which to view Melchizedek. The Ethiopian Bible plunges into the depths, uncovering details that challenge our understanding of divine authority, cosmic order, and the spiritual hierarchy that governs creation. Exploring this hidden knowledge can reshape how we see biblical history and spiritual leadership. It asks us to consider questions that stretch our imagination and faith alike. And this is where you, the viewer, become an essential part of the journey. You are very special to us as a viewer. We want you to stay with us for a long time. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends. Your engagement is not just a number, it is a part of this mission to explore the depths of hidden biblical wisdom and bring it to light. Help us to reach 10,000 subscribers. Your click, your share, your support helps us dig deeper and bring more revelations to you. Please support us financially by giving us a SuperThink certificate so that we can reach you with as much deep knowledge as possible. Every contribution strengthens this journey, helping us uncover truths that have been hidden for centuries. And which city and country you watching this video with, and at what time? Write your name and city in the comments. It's not just about engagement, it's about building a community of seekers, people who are curious, passionate, and committed to discovering the deeper layers of spiritual truth. If you would like to get the complete Bible 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English, The link is given in the description. This gives you direct access to the texts where Melchizedek's story and wisdom are preserved, allowing you to explore and connect with these mysteries firsthand. It's an invitation to see what has long been hidden, to understand the depth of his mission, and to follow a path that stretches across time and history. As we step into this journey, remember that the story of Melchizedek is more than ancient history. It is a call to curiosity, a test of faith, and an opportunity to explore the intersections of destiny, divine plan, and human experience. From his first appearance, he challenges us to question, reflect, and seek understanding beyond what is obvious. He is a guide, a mystery, and a key to insights that have been preserved through centuries. In the chapters ahead, we will travel from the familiar accounts in Genesis to the hidden wisdom preserved in Ethiopia. We will witness encounters, blessings, and spiritual missions that have shaped history in ways most people have never imagined. And through it all, you are not just a viewer, you are a participant in this journey. Your curiosity, engagement, and support are part of the unfolding story, connecting past and present, faith and discovery, mystery and understanding. When Abraham came back from the battle against the kings who had taken Lot, he was tired but victorious. A person appeared who would change the course of biblical history forever. The king of Salem, whose name means peace, was this man. He was also called the priest of God Most High, a title that had both spiritual and cosmic meaning. When Abraham got close, Melchizedek brought him bread and wine. This act has been seen as a sign of God's blessing and friendship for hundreds of years. Melchizedek blessed Abraham right away, without any introduction or explanation of where he came from or who he was. In return, Abraham gave him a tenth of everything he had gained from the battle. The scene looks simple, but it is very deep. This man appears out of nowhere, with no introduction or explanation, but people respect, awe, and obey him. In Genesis 14, there isn't much information, but what there is suggests deep truths. Melchizedek is not just a king giving a normal blessing. He is a priest who acts as a bridge between God and people. He sees Abraham's victory as coming from God, but his role doesn't seem to fit in with the history of people around him. He is not part of normal family trees or earthly politics, which gives him an aura of eternity. Scholars and theologians have long been amazed by the fact that he seems to have no father, mother, beginning of days, or end of life. This lack of an origin makes his figure timeless and mysterious. Even Abraham, who had been walking with God for decades, bows down to him in humility. This shows that he recognizes a spiritual authority that is much higher than any human rank or achievement. Genesis 14 tells a short story, but it gives us a glimpse into something much bigger. The King James Bible gives us a base, but it doesn't answer all of our questions. Who was Melchizedek really? Why did he meet Abraham right then? And why does the text stress his priesthood in a way that makes it seem like it will last beyond this life? These are mysteries that the King James translation keeps but doesn't explain. The story is mostly about action, the blessing and the tithe, but the figure's origins, cosmic role, and ultimate purpose are still unclear, which leaves room for thought and speculation. Melchizedek shows up again in the Psalms, specifically Psalm 110, where David talks about a priest who will always be like Melchizedek. This is amazing because the psalm connects a historical king to an eternal priesthood, making a typology that connects time and strengthens spiritual authority. Many Christians see the psalm as a prophecy, but its short description keeps an air of mystery. It doesn't say who Melchizedek was or why his order is better than the Levitical priests. Instead, it shows him as a model for an eternal priesthood that goes beyond family ties. The link between Abraham's meeting and the eternal priesthood in the Psalms makes readers think of Melchizedek as both a real person and a symbol, both a person who lived in the past and a person who will live forever. The New Testament's Hebrews 7 builds on this idea by showing Melchizedek as a type of Christ, a priest whose order can't be measured by family ties. The author stresses that Levi, the priestly line in Israel, had not yet existed when Melchizedek met Abraham. This means that Melchizedek's priesthood was better in principle. It is characterized as eternal, a priesthood independent of mortality or succession, and it presents the concept of a spiritual hierarchy unbound by human conventions. But even Hebrews doesn't cover everything. We hear about how great, superior, and eternal he is, but we don't know where this power comes from, how big his role in the universe is, or the deeper mysteries of his purpose. The picture of Melchizedek in the King James Bible is both simple and deep. He is a symbol of peace, the king of Salem, which means city of peace. He brings bread and wine, gives blessings, and takes tithes. Every gesture has a meaning. In Christian theology, bread and wine are later seen as symbols of communion, but in this case, they are just a normal gesture of hospitality that is made more special by the spiritual status of the person giving it. His blessing of Abraham is short but powerful because it acknowledges Abraham's journey, his victories, and his relationship with God. Melchizedek's actions show authority, insight, and spiritual perception that go beyond what most people can understand, even without more story. Even though his actions are clear, the KJV doesn't answer important questions. There is no mention of Melchizedek's family, his role in the larger cosmic order, or why his priesthood is not part of the Levitical system. These gaps make it hard to figure out what they mean. The King James Bible is a reliable text that has guided many believers over the years. However, it also leaves room for speculation, allowing seekers to wonder about the hidden layers behind this brief but powerful appearance. It makes readers think about what it means for someone to live outside of the normal limits of time and family, to have power that doesn't come from birthright but is still acknowledged by even the most powerful patriarch. The lack of information about Melchizedek has also kept people interested in him. Scholars, theologians, and adherents are attracted to the figure precisely because he embodies both presence and absence, familiarity and obscurity. In a way, Melchizedek is a door that connects earthly victories with divine authority, temporal history with eternal priesthood. The King James Bible shows him with respect and in a short way, which makes you think about him while keeping the mystery. He is the king who blesses and the priest who mediates, but no one knows where he came from or what he really wants, so his story is stuck between what we can see and what we can't. His role still has an effect today, even with the KJV's limitations. The meeting with Abraham, the connection in Psalm 110, and the explanation in Hebrews 7 all show that there is a connection between human history and God's plan. Melchizedek serves as a benchmark for evaluating eternal priesthood, a reference point for comprehending spiritual authority, and a figure whose fleeting presence resonates throughout history. He is a good example of how divine purposes can intersect with human history in ways that are both subtle and deep, immediate and eternal, historical and timeless. This depiction leaves readers with a strong sense of tension. Melchizedek acts with authority, gives blessings, and mediates divine favor, but his origins and cosmic significance are purposefully left out. The King James Bible gives us enough information to know how important he is, but it also keeps the mystery alive, making us think, ask questions, and be amazed. He is a man who is not part of the usual story. His presence demands recognition without explanation, and his story, though short, makes anyone who reads it think about the unseen parts of faith and divine order. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has a canon that is much bigger than those of most other Christian groups. It has between 81 and 88 books, each with layers of history, prophecy, and spiritual insight that are often missing from Western Bibles. In these texts, Melchizedek is not just a passing character. He is a central and lasting figure whose role is much bigger than what is found in Genesis or Psalms. The Ethiopian texts, especially Jubilees and 1 Enoch, give us a better picture of who he was before he was born, who he is as an eternal priest, and how important he is to the universe. They show us a person whose influence reaches both the heavenly and earthly realms. These texts depict Melchizedek as a pre-existent entity whose existence precedes that of Abraham and the formation of specific terrestrial lineages. The Ethiopian texts place him in a larger spiritual context and show him as a deliberate tool of divine order. This is different from the King James Bible, which suddenly brings him into Abraham's story. He is more than just a king or priest from the past. He is a priesthood that goes beyond time and connects the human and the divine. The Ethiopian canon stresses the idea that some people in biblical history were part of a bigger, ongoing plan, beings whose purpose can't be fully understood just by looking at events in the past. Jubilees, sometimes called the Lesser Genesis, adds to the story of Genesis by giving more information and context that is not found in the standard Western canon. In this case, Melchizedek is not only blessing Abraham, but he is also carrying out a divine mission that has been given to him from the start. His actions are planned and purposeful, meant to guide and teach people in line with God's plan for the universe. People see him as a very spiritually powerful person, and even the patriarchs respect his wisdom and insight. In these texts, he is not limited by earthly constraints. His authority is derived directly from God, establishing a priesthood that transcends human hierarchies and temporal succession. The book of 1 Enoch sheds more light on Melchizedek